The forest is cultural heart of Estonians, also known as metskuieslase kulttuuri suuda. Because Estonia, and therefore Estonian folkloristics, are not widespread in the USA, I will begin this presentation with an overview of Estonia and then contextualize Estonian folkloristics in terms of cultural and national identities. Next, I will provide an overview of 3 folktales collected in the late 1800s. Next, we take a quick journey to the nature energy trail where characters from folktales exist in the form of wooden sculptures. Subsequently, I will explore the tales through the heart-centered work of James Hillman and Mary Watkins before concluding with some preliminary findings. While I intend to demonstrate how the forest functions as a cultural heart, I do not mean to imply that everyone in Estonia is an environmentalist. Estonia is a small northern European country situated due south of Finland. Currently, there are just over 1.3 million people living in over 17,000 square miles, making it smaller in size than the US states of Vermont and New Hampshire combined. The indigenous language is Estonian, a Finno-Ugric language most closely related to Finnish, but also linked to a number of other smaller language groups. Pre-conquest, about 10,000 to 9,000 years before the Common Era, until the 13th century of the Common Era, a variety of civilizations lived in small settlements across what is now Estonia. By the time of the medieval Crusades, who we now call Estonians, were settled in this area. In the 13th century, the Teutonic Order conquered Estonia as part of the medieval Crusades, and since then, Estonia has been colonized, except for an approximately 50 years worth of freedom. Estonians were part of the serf system until the early to mid decades of the 19th century and were enslaved or worked for German nobility on manors, big estates. Up until the end of World War I, Estonia had been ruled by Denmark, Germany, Sweden, and Russia. The first period of independence was declared in 1918 and actually achieved in 1920. By 1939, the Nazis and Soviets had divided up Europe by means of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, with Estonia being assigned to the Soviet sphere of influence. Although during the war, both Nazi and Soviets occupied Estonia. From the end of World War II to 1991, Estonia was occupied by the Soviet Union, and independence was restored when the Soviet Union collapsed. Forests naturally covered large swaths of Estonia historically, with coastal areas, bogs, and mires being the exception. Grasslands are maintained in many areas due to mowing or cutting for planting crops. However, in 1920, forests only covered approximately 21% of the land, while by the year 2020, it was estimated that forests covered 51% of the land. Due to the long-standing cultural prominence of the German nobility in Estonia and the emphasis on German language education, ideas of German Romanticism spread into Estonian culture. This movement encouraged communion with the natural world, life in the countryside, and the search for a lost idyllic past. The belief of the divine in nature becomes prominent. While the Baltic Germans or the German nobility dabbled in folklore, collecting, educated Estonians absorbed ideas from German Romanticism and also integrated ideas from Finnish national culture building. Historically, Estonian folkloristics was closely connected to the Finnish school, with its emphasis on the geographic historical method. This method focused on establishing the hypothetical archetype of a given folk narrative, its geographical starting point, and its historical routes of travel. The capital of Estonia is Tallinn, which is just over 50 miles from Helsinki, the capital of Finland. Due to the close proximity of the two countries and language similarities, there have been long-standing cultural exchanges. During this era, Finland was also occupied by Russia. As Russia tightened its grip on Finnish culture, the interest in an authentic Finnish culture began to blossom. The Finnish national epic, Old Kalevala, is published in 1835. The Estonian national awakening begins to unfold in the mid-19th century. Estonians are finally able to take a more prominent role in Estonian intellectual life during this era. By this time, there had been 500 to 600 years of Danish, Swedish, German, and Russian colonization, so it becomes quite natural for Estonians to start seeking out the pre-colonization mythic past and do so via their own folktales. Jacob Hurt, born in 1839, starts collecting local folktales and publishes a small collection in German in 1863. By the 1880s, he has a large campaign going to collect traditional folk tales. However, according to Professor of Estonian folklore at the University of Tartu, Ülo Valk, most of the tales collected during this time were already newer variants of older tales that were part of oral traditions. The Estonian national epic, Kavalipoeg, Son of Kalev, is published in 1857 by Fredrik Reinhold Kreutzwald, based on folk tales and written in verse. The first National Song Festival takes place in 1869 in Tartu. The folklore culture, along with other intellectual drivers, develop into the Estonians seeing themselves as a people, not for the first time, not just as country folks. This then is the beginning of Estonianness. Laura Stark, a Finnish folklorist, argues that in Finland, the forest was a location where the colonizing powers had limited influence and social norms imposed upon people could be ignored. Parallels can be drawn to the enslaved and newly freed Estonian peasants, in which the forest could have been a space for Estonian ideas and cultures to survive. As Estonia is a naturally forested country, and due to the German folktale influences of collectors such as the Brothers Grimm, it is unsurprising that many folktales contained images of or were situated in the forest. As we go through the three folktales included in this presentation, we will be focusing on the images, but I will also provide a brief outline of the tales. If, however, you wish to read them for yourselves, you can contact me and I will send you an electronic copy. All three tales come from an amazing collection in English entitled Deep in the Forest, 100 Estonian Fairy Tales About the Forest and Its People by Risto Järv, based on the collections of the Estonian Folklore Archive of the Estonian Literary Museum. And yes, there is a National Folklore Archive in Estonia with over 1.5 million documents, more documents than people. The first tale we will look at is called Why Aspen Leaves Flutter, and it was written down and submitted to Jacob Hurt's collection in 1895. A brief outline of the tale goes like this. The mother lives with the daughter in a tiny sauna hut. The daughter is beautiful. She takes walks deep into the forest, pulled by energy that is never named. In the evening, she sings next to the sauna hut. The mother tries to stop her daughter from roaming the forest at night. For a while, the daughter stops her wanderings, but eventually resumes them. The mother wishes harm to befall her daughter for the wild ways and then curses her. For a while, the daughter doesn't go to the forest, but eventually she returns. On this last journey, the bear eats the girl and buries her remains under a tree stump. The aspen trees witness the horror of the daughter's death, causing them to tremble. What's interesting about this tale, there's a number of things that I'm going to bring up now. The tale starts with this sentence: the mother loved her daughter, and the daughter loved her mother just as fervently. So we start with a loving relationship. Also, we start with the mother and daughter living in the sauna hut, which is a place of intimacy and healing in Estonian culture. The daughter sings in the evening, and this can be a form of imaginal communication, but with who or what we do not know. We also are uninformed about the mysterious forces pulling the girl to the forest and what happens at night when the daughter roams the forest. So that is never revealed. And I think it's just as critical to look at this emptiness of time in the story when we don't know what's happening, but obviously the daughter's coming back safely every night. And it's especially interesting because depending on the time of year, for example, in June, this part of the world never really has darkness. They call it white nights. And basically it gets to twilight for a few hours and then the sun rises once again. The daughter seems like a half wild being as long as she is enchanted. Now, what's really interesting is that she's described as having black hair and face as white as snow. Does this remind anyone of Snow White? Despite the daughter ignoring these human instructions, she's safe and seemingly okay until, that is, the mother puts the curse on the daughter. Once that happens, the bear slices the daughter open, eats her, and buries the remains. The remains are buried under a stump, and there's a huge symbolism going on here because if we were to look at this literally, burying somebody under a stump is really a very difficult thing to do. And we could wonder if the stump then functions as the daughter's tombstone. Also very interesting in this story is that the aspen trees are subjects with feelings and hearts that they express when they witness the girl's murder. So they're the ones who actually see the girl killed. So we have a couple of interesting things going on here. We have a snow whitish, beautiful daughter. We have a mother who loves her daughter very much, but curses her. Of course, we have the wild bear that eats the girl. We have the aspen trees that bear witness to all of this and to this day are still trembling because of it. And we have the remains of the daughter buried under a tree stump. Our next tale then is The Lucky Hunter, that was written down and submitted to Jacob Hurt in 1888, a little bit earlier. The brief tale outline is the hunter with his dogs goes into the woods to do his normal hunting, but the dogs don't seem interested in hunting. The hunter sees a naked baby lying in a basket made of twigs, and the baby's crying, so the hunter reacts directly from his heart by comforting the baby. The forest fairy appears and thanks the hunter for loving her baby and providing it comfort. The hunter is familiar with concepts of the forest fairy because his father and grandfather have shared tales with him. Because of his kindness to the baby, the forest fairy grants the hunter the language of birds and beasts. She gives him a long rope with knots, and each time he unties a knot, he will have a successful hunting trip. So the forest fairy has given him permission to hunt. However, there's a caveat. If he reveals his new powers, he will die. When he's home, he asks his wife to feed the dogs, and she fails to feed them properly. But because the hunter can understand the language of the dogs, he knows that they were not fed properly and confronts his wife. She wants the secrets of his magic powers. And he's caught in a quandary here because if he reveals them, he dies. And if he doesn't reveal them, his wife continues to hound him over it. The hunter finally decides to tell his wife and accept death until he gets advice from a bird. The bird says, just beat your wife and don't die on account of this. So what are we left with? We're left with dogs, hunting dogs that don't hunt, a crying baby in a cradle that's naked and therefore not acculturated in any stretch of the imagination, a forest fairy, intergenerational knowledge about forest fairies, and a hunter who responds from his heart to the baby. We might see the dogs functioning as wise helpers along the journey, a la Joseph Campbell, Hero's Journey, or not. But we also see that they didn't hunt near the baby, and they're alerting the hunter to the poor food they've been fed. So my question really is can we see the ego as the wife who wants a logical understanding of how the hunter knows what he knows? In other words, the hunter is living in a magical realm, but the wife could be the ego trying to analyze magic, which, as we all know, once enchantment is subject to logical analyzation, enchantment collapses. And then we have the symbolism of a rope with knots. Rope can be seen as Rapunzel's hair or as the connection between normal and magical worlds, like in Jack and the Beanstalk. And I wonder, does the rope keep the hunter connected to his heartfelt responses with the baby and the realm of forest magic? Our next story is called The Forest Elder, and it was written and collected in 1894. The tale begins with an explanation of jurisdiction of the forest elder as unique to each forest, and as the character serving as judge and executioner for any transgressions. Then in the tale, we have a young man who hunts in the forest. This young man sees a gold-feathered bird singing on top of a fir tree and shoots it. The forest elder arrives, and the young man denies what he's done, But then the forest elder looks in the young man's bag and sees the dead bird. The forest elder punishes the young man for his transgressions via a magic touch to the young man's rifle. And then when the young man unloads the rifle, it bangs and creates smoke so the young man can't see. But when the smoke clears, the young man is blind. So we have a young man who sees, and I quote, a splendid gold-feathered bird singing gaily atop a fir. In a lot of traditional symbolism, we see the fir tree as the tree of life and wisdom. It's an evergreen, it remains beautiful in the winter. And gold is such an overused metaphor in human culture that the hunter fails to imagine the gold-feathered bird. He is an example of James Hillman's anaesthetized heart. He doesn't see either the beauty of the bird or its monetary value. Yet in so many folktales across cultures, everyone wants the bird that lays the golden eggs, the bird with golden feathers, the gold bird. And all the young man hears is the song, which he interprets as noise, so he kills the bird. When the forest elder arrives, he is described as wearing, and I quote, a hat woven of birch bark, a coat and pants as rough and wrinkled as fir trunks, and a beard that was like gray oak moss, end quote. The forest elder gives the hunter a warning, and to the warning, the young man is ignorant because he feels he's escaped punishment. Yet when he unloads the rifle, it explodes and blinds the young man. And what's so amazing in this story is the punishment for the heart being unable to see the beauty in the gold-feathered bird is blinding. To me, this is a completely arresting image. In other words, when you fail to see with your heart or fail to imagine, then you lose your actual eyesight. So now let's take a little journey on the nature energy trail, or Vaiki Varada in Estonian. The nature energy trail is one of many places that have been protected and rediscovered as part of the reclaiming of past Estonian cultural identity. Other places include sacred springs, groves, and rocks that are believed to be holders of sacred energies from the mythic past. On this trail, the energy spots are enhanced with wooden sculptures featuring characters from Estonian folktales, such as the ones we just explored. The healing properties are interwoven with tales such as Takmes Taskus, or Wise Man in the Pocket, and this is a good place for relieving stress and relaxing. At Jakub to Subsurma, or Jacob Cheats Death, you can leave your negative thoughts behind and strengthen your heart. These sculptures serve as a reminder of how the mythic relationship is being remembered or reconstructed in the present day. And now let's take a walk in the forest. So now we proceed to James Hillman and the idea of heart. If we accept Hillman's argument of the heart as an organ of sight, then the fairy tales reveal various responses of the heart towards the images contained in these tales. In addition, we learn about the aspen tree's heartfelt response to the daughter's slaying. So it's not just humans who have a heart organ of sight, but also trees. Folk tales and other narratives invite us into a space where we imagine and perceive, think about ideas and feel the drama, holistically explore ourselves and the world around us. The unification of various modalities are presented in these tales. A more extensive analysis of similar tales would potentially reveal other themes. Seeing then becomes a type of relationship between the subjectivity of the two things that are gazing and loving upon each other, both within the tales and between the tale and the human reading or listening to them. In the tales, we see the forest as an imaginal realm full of magic, fantastical creatures, conflicting images, and perils in an imaginal, not analytic manner. In the lucky hunter, the hunter sees the naked baby with his heart and accepts the magical realm into which he has stepped. The hunter's nagging wife can be symbolized as the hunter's internal conflict between his heart and ego mind. Finally, the hunter has decided to share the secret and intervene. However, the rooster gives him some advice, instead telling the hunter to beat his wife. In many traditions, the rooster symbolizes honesty, virility, or unconscious wisdom in respect to the tension created between magical worlds and the profane human world. One possible interpretation is that the beating functions to reduce the role of the ego. In Hillman's terms, the anesthetized heart fails to see beauty. In the forest elder, the young man fails to see the magical nature of the gold-feathered bird singing on top of a fir tree and kills it, while a heart that sees fully would be in awe of this bird. Instead, the young man sees something to be possessed, and in doing so destroys the beauty. The spell placed on the young man's gun by the forest elder makes manifest what was already true. The young man was unable to see beauty. In the aspen trees, the daughter is pulled by a force into the forest. Her activities there are unknown, but we can infer that she is safe since she always returns home until the point when the mother disowns her and places a curse on her. Then the daughter becomes separated from the ensouled forest and subsequently falls prey to its dangers. Yet in this story, the aspen trees see from their heart when they are horrified by the daughter's death. As Hillman writes, the unitary, wholehearted thought of this heart presents psychology with an animal mode of reflection. This reflection, in which imagination and perception, thinking and feeling, self and world are one. I propose that these folk tales contain the animal mode of reflection in which humans are not separate from the world, but just one more creature within it. For Mary Watkins, we have a slightly more active way of the heart seeing. Mary Watkins writes, with exacting specificity, free rising images convey the way the soul perceives the daily realities we live amidst. This one brief sentence encapsulates the manner in which I believe Estonians notice the forest. The three folktales contain daily realities embedded in the magical world. They do not always portray a romanticized image, as sometimes the forest is harmful to humans. But all tales reorient the consumer of the tale to the subjectivity of the non-human world. Watkins argues for an ecological accompaniment to change discourses of colonization towards the forest. Therefore, listening, witnessing, and participating in relationship with the forest is critical. She argues that to, quote, accompany is a horizontal relationship that is situated with a historical and social context, end quote. If in these tales, the forest functions as a subjective being with a horizontal relationship to the human world, these tales illustrate the idea of natural commons as a place that belongs to no human. However, we do experience the human dependence on the forest. When cultures have been occupied for long periods of time, the cultural artifacts, such as these folk tales and many others, contain a sense of the people's imaginal realities. And exploring these images from the past and relative present helps the people understand themselves, their priorities, and their imaginings for the future. If then the accompanying and noticing heart is reworking images on a national scale, these images must contain potent energy sources. After all, stale images no longer inspire new work. That being said, what is stale or vibrant is not a homogeneous cultural movement, but rather an energy working its way through the Estonian culture in awful subtle and contradictory ways. From the nature energy trail to desires to raise standards of living by selling wood products to other nations, we can see that while the forest is critical and central, not all roads lead in the same direction. So my findings. As theoretical work on Estonian folklore has been done in Estonian, German, Russian, Finnish, and English, I have limited my research to English and a few Estonian sources. In order to do full justice to this topic, a researcher would have to be fluent in all these languages or work with people who are. I believe the language barriers, along with the historical occupations, have contributed to Estonian folklore's marginalization within the USA. The heart that sees the forest as an integral part of cultural identity is widespread in Estonia, but not universal and not always ensouled. Social and historical forces outlined by Atko, Remmel, and Tõnno Jonuks or Heidi Valk negate the centrality of the forest-loving Estonian and contextualize it as a recent construct that is not universal. However, the imaginal heart that sees an ensouled forest is also alive and well. As we saw in our journey to Vaike Vairada, the embodied manifestation of imaginal artifacts reconnects the future to the mythic past of Estonianness by inviting subtle contemplation of both the surface images and the imaginal realities they contain. The sculpture's presence in the forest helps the heart to see, as in Hillman's imagining the forest. These images and stories excavated from the past create new relationships and ideas about the forest and the cultural heart of Estonian, Estonia, as in Watkins' concept of noticing the image. Vaike Vaireta is one of many examples of this process that is playing out currently. If by heart we mean the imagining heart or the center of human existence, then these tales demonstrate a relationship between the Estonians of at least the 19th century, if not earlier, with the forest. Furthermore, as I mentioned previously, these mythic artifacts are activated in Estonian art, music, theater, and literature daily. I situate the Estonian cultural heart not as akin to environmental protection or environmental activism, but rather that the forest is embedded within everyday culture in religious, romantic, or extractive modes for the majority of Estonians. Within the Estonian folk tales lies the evidence for the forest as the cultural heart of Estonia. While this very brief initial exploration of Hillman, Watkins, and Estonian folklore is important, more in-depth work needs to be completed to fully flesh out the ideas that I have presented today. And thank you so much for listening.